It's a delight to share with you once again. It feels a short time ago, but it's a year since I was last here sharing with you at a special anniversary then. I don't know how many years, was it 30 years, 40 years? 40, 50, 40? But it was a long time ago, and yet it doesn't feel so as we gather together. And so you're a great people with strong Christian commitment, and that really does matter most of all, covering all ages. You're enthusiastic about the gospel and serving the people in your setting, particularly amongst Korean brothers and sisters. And that's something that I honour, and certainly the presbytery feels proud about. I hope my words will resonate with the mission that you seek to serve in Jesus Christ. We are realistically considering the integrity of the nature of the church today. And as we do, we recognise with honesty that the church sometimes finds itself maintaining structures and maintaining structures that are tired and that are in need of new life. We recognise the growing gap between the life of the church and so much of what goes on in the wider world around us. These things are manifestly true when we seek to grasp fresh opportunities to be the church today. The Archbishop Designate of Canterbury, head of the worldwide Anglican Church, though not all Anglicans in Sydney recognise her with the same place that she should have within that church. The Right Reverend Dame Cyril Mullally, she'd been the Bishop of London and just been readily appointed. And when she was at Canterbury, she gave these words: "As I respond to the call of Christ in this new ministry, I remain rooted in my first calling, to follow Christ and to know him and make him known to the world." Now that remains for me the core of everything we do, to maintain that first calling that we have. If you've been called by Christ and Christ changed your life, that calling should still be yours. It doesn't disappear. It's got nothing to do with wearing out with age. It's something that's meaningful and powerful. When we look at the future and what it may bring, we maintain our confidence in Jesus Christ. And we're still challenged to be followers today. As a church, we must retain our understanding of the past, but do so with a firm sense of enduring vision for the future and giving shape to the mission of the church for the future. However we do this, we have to begin where we are. You can't begin anywhere else. This is where we are, and this is the context. We're called to articulate God's vision for this moment in time and in the future. There's a tendency amongst many to criticize the church. And such criticism will always gain support. If somebody stands there and says, "I want to criticize the church," they'll be there saying, "Right, we're ready to hear that," because that's the enthusiasm they feel for it. However, I'm firmly of the view that the church is God's. The church is not ours, it's certainly not mine, but it's his. And the church still has its roots and grounded in our belief in Jesus Christ. Now, Eusebius was a bishop of Caesarea at the beginning of the 4th century. There's not one, however old you are, that was around then. But he had some important things to say about the early days of the Christian church. He was able to sum up the best part of 200 years from the people he was working with of the Christian era. And he wrote this: "They set out on journeys from home and performed the work of evangelists, making it their aim to preach as such had not yet heard the faith of all, and to give them the books of the divine gospels. They were content to lay the foundation of faith in some foreign places, accepting others as pastors to whom they entrusted the care of those lately brought in. Then they would depart to other lands and missions with the grace and cooperation of God." As I think of proclaiming the good news, and I think that's what we're about, proclaiming good news into our community, into the places that all of us serve, I hold those two texts that we together just referred to a few moments ago. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. And then Revelation, last book of the Bible, but an important word, where we read those words where God is perceived as saying, I am making everything new. How do you hold those two things together? The things that are unchanging and the newness of what God is doing. They give us both, I think, a starting point, but they also give us a goal to explore our mission, to explore the ways in which God is going to proclaim the good news through us. Now, we must be realistic about the enormity of the task. Here in Australia today, the task is enormous. Whether you're Australian, Korean, or dare I be born in England, wherever you fall, the task in Australia today is real. We need to understand that there are now millions of people who do not know Christ in our community. And we must be a church and a community ready to reach out, find the words, find the ways of spelling out that gospel to people today. The challenge today is a matter of change. And our proclamation is part of the way. If you work in business or commerce, wherever you are, whatever role you have, you know that change is happening all around us. The management of change is one of the great challenges. In church life, there's far too much energy put into resisting change. If somebody says they want change in the church, there are always those who are willing to say, oh, I don't know about this. But the truth is that we will have to change in some ways if we're going to really reach out to reach our generation for Christ. Resisting change in the church is not new. It's something that's always been there. But lies in the fact that there's a good deal of concern now for our communities. For example, think of the economic insecurity of which there is, the increasing numbers of people who are struggling to be able to find the money and the way and means of living their lives. Think of the global tensions. You can't have listened to the news this morning without being aware of how much tension there is within the world. Tension in your own back lake country in Korea, yes. Tensions in Ukraine, tensions in the middle of the earth. Wherever you turn in the world, there is tension. When you think of all that time in Gaza and Israel, where in fact there was so much, it just went on and on and on. And believe me, it's not over yet. And we know in all those places there are many signs of tension. And then the moral insecurity. And we know a lot about that in Australia. The things today that people accept as being something that's okay, that's all right. Some of it is not all right. It is time we spoke up of the Church of Jesus Christ, who spoke for values, who spoke for families, who spoke for people who need to know the good news of Jesus, and to do it in a way that's meaningful. Our Christian faith can be explored as a stable factor in a rapidly changing world. I'm not suggesting we naively hold on to the past. We mustn't do everything that the past was about. We mustn't just be part of that. But we need to recognize that in a relatively short time, we have seen so much change. Australia is a country that we should be able to handle. When I went to school, Australia was that country at the bottom with about 12 million people, 12 million people. It's now 30 and growing. And we know that this country is not only growing in terms of its size, but it's changing and not always for the good. We recognize we need some things that hold us fast. People can be tempted to look at the past with hesitation and sadness. If we're honest, there will be some in this congregation, even now as I speak, that will say, oh, I wish it was like it was in the past. But you can't. You can't just hold on to the past. We have to be a people that know what it is to look forward. Many folks grieve that we no longer have many things. It led one wit to say, nostalgia isn't what it used to be, you know. We need something that's taking us back. What we see in the Christian community are two extremes. Those who desire for change's sake, and those who always resist change. You know, neither of those views are actually right. We need to be people who are prepared to be different. Just think of the world in which we're in now. Think of some of the areas in which we have signs of challenge. The bereavement experience. Learning to live with loss is a real part of our community. In fact, I read only the other day that we're going to say to ourselves, we don't need funerals anymore. We just forget all that. When people die, what does it matter? What does it matter? It's part of our lives to hold on to those things that have been before us. Family life, marriage, relationships, and children. And let me say, I believe in marriage. We need to affirm some of those values that are easily kicked down the street as though they don't matter. Relationships, children. Children need to be in your churches. You need to teach them the ways of the gospel. That's why I'm pleased to be listening to some of the stories I have of earlier today of the importance of trying to lead people in those ways. Retirement and aging. You know, we've come to a point now where we think that older people don't matter. Please don't forget your history. Age does matter. It is to be honoured. Now, that doesn't mean to say that it's not me, because I'm now very old, saying that. It's saying it because it does matter that we should be concerned about those who are before us and all the attendant challenges that they're facing. I understand the concern of many people who live through the changes of the recent past, reflecting in the influence and constituency of much of the worldwide church today. You know as well as I do, even in Korea, the church is not what it used to be. Oh, it's okay saying we know the church is 250,000. Yes, but mainly older people, let's be honest about it. Many young people don't want anything to do with some of those things. Having been there, I can stand there and say, oh yes, it's wonderful, it's wonderful. Things are not what they were. They're certainly not what they were where I came from in Europe. They're certainly not what they were in Australia. So when you've got something that's real and good and strong, hold on to it. Hold on to it and build for the future and help us to be a growing church. Anyway, I mustn't preach too long. I offer you 3 factors emerging from the theme of sharing Jesus Christ today and doing so from the starting point of the church. And I do so as a born and bred evangelist, somebody who believes we have a mission to reach with the good news to our community. First, some things should not change. The unchanging reality is the essential fixed point of our mission. There's a permanence about God's love. There's a need to recognize some of the unchanging features of our message of faith. For me, it's not just about the reality of love, but the application. When I trained for ministry, I trained in Bristol in England at Wesley College there. And I had a colleague who I spent over 3 years in prison. He'd been in prison for 3 years in South Africa. He then trained to be a minister. And so when we went to South Africa to preach, I said, I must go. And I went to Robben Island. Now, that was the island in which he was in prison for being a headmaster of a school with children, a person who really suffered for his faith. And 3 cells away from where he was Nelson Mandela, who had 27 years in prison. And whatever we want to say about that past, many of the things he stood for were grounded in the gospel. And I went there and I thought of this man. And I thought of Stanley. And I thought of the faith that he displayed and revealed. And then I went to Myanmar, Burma, as some of you will remember it. And I spoke at a Christian seminary. And local politicians were making it very difficult for this Bible school. They were making it very difficult as they were growing. As they were growing, they wanted to expand the life of the college. And so they were building an extension. And the police, the local police in Myanmar, came to see them and said they would support them, providing they gave them money. And our leaders there said, no, we will not give you money. They woke up the next morning to find that the extension had been knocked down. But I was so proud of them. They stood for the gospel. They stood for what was right. And sometimes you have to do that. And when you do it, it's costly. Some things don't change. We recognize that truth. Our primary purpose remains the continuing need to offer Christ. I remember visiting Hong Kong. And we visited Hong Kong at a very significant time, because that was the time when the Chinese government had made expressions to the people of Hong Kong that they would not be allowed to have the same rights that they felt that they had. And so we arrived at the airport and there were literally thousands of young people. You know, they didn't even tell their parents, many of them, they were at church. And I knew this was true because I preached in one of the big churches there. And they didn't tell their parents because their parents were worried. They were going to these demonstrations, not because they wanted to be troublemakers, but they knew they had to stand for what was right. And we walked through the airport and we heard them. They weren't shouting and throwing things. They were singing softly songs about Jesus, singing softly things about justice. Sometimes we have to recognize that some things don't change. Human need is very real. It's hard to imagine that there's poverty in Australia, but I can tell you there is. And there's poverty in so many places in the world. And we recognize that some of these things don't change. What remains the same? The example of selfishness. We see it so often. That the urgency to offer the good news. But I can tell you that the certainty of grace is one of the unchanging things. I spent a whole day with Phil Yancey. Some of you will have known Phil Yancey from the books that he wrote. And he spoke about grace so freely. Grace is so important. The unmerited, unearned love of God for all people. And if you've never read anything that he said, you want to read What's So Amazing About Grace. He talked about grace as being absolute, inflexible, and all-encompassing. The grace of God. That doesn't change. That's something that's important. And if we pass anything on to a new generation, it has to be, let me tell you about grace. Grace isn't the goodness of the church. Grace isn't the might of the past. Grace is the love of God which is given to us freely. The love which makes all the difference. So our style and content will change, I'm certain. But the core emphasis of our message will still be the grace of God. Secondly, some things may change. Now, this is a difficult one, because this isn't absolutely certain for everybody. Some things may change. Some things are there. It's more complex. Problems can emerge because of our indecisiveness. Choices can hinder and leave people confused. However, we must be willing to be witnesses to the actual needs of people. The things that don't change need to change sometimes. They may change and can prove to be a huge challenge. The way we worship. Oh, there are some that say, we should worship in this way, it should never change. Sorry, I say this is not, you're wrong. Things have had to change. Now, that doesn't mean to say that everything has to change. It doesn't mean to say that every song has to be a song that's written yesterday or written 300 years ago. It can be both. And both really matter in the life of the world. Our dress has to change. Look, I was converted to Christ from outside the church. And I know what it was that when you went to church, the boys and the men had to have ties. No, I'm not saying you shouldn't have tie. Oh, but if you don't wear a tie, you're not dressed properly. That wasn't how it was really today. It can't be that way. We've got to say to ourselves, let us learn to find the way that's right for some. And whatever's right for some is okay. Because what matters is that we are willing to change when necessary. The practice of our devotional life. You will have stories. In our church back in Korea, 5,000 come to the prayer meeting. Now, it's great that you have a prayer meeting each day of the week. But I don't think you have 200 every day, do you? You don't, because people are different. But I know this. All of you know that prayer matters. And that devotions matter. And that's really the most important thing that we hold to. The practice of that life, the way we understand the gospel, will be something that changes and is different sometimes. The last 50 years of much longer in Australia stretches back and sees so many changes. Yet come to church and by comparison, little seems to have changed. It was once said, as a society, we don't know where we're going, and we're going there awfully quickly. Whereas in the church, when the church has an idea where it's going, He goes there awfully slowly. And sometimes trying to work out how we can remain and hold on fast to the gospel and the ways in which we serve God. Be proud of your tradition. Be proud of the things that make you who you are today. Don't dispense with it. But know this, we're all so very, very different. And that's something that we should hold on to. Colour, music, language. You know, at one time, this would be unthinkable in church. What's that thing there on a stick, that guitar? What are the drums for? But things change, and that's okay. And what's this? Still choirs? Of course. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What matters is we need to be willing to change where it's appropriate and right, and do that in a way. You've got a fantastic minister here, in my mind. And he would smile and he would say, Did he honestly say that? I do. He's a good minister, a good wife, and a good family. And they do everything they can to affirm the gospel. Hold on to him very fast, because that's important, that truth is there. But recognizing the changes that have gone on. Technology is changing. You know, artificial intelligence may be there. It can help us with a bit of English or a bit of language if we're trying to put together a piece, but it can't create the gospel. It can't create what it is that we need to be as a church today. We need to go beyond artificial intelligence to something that's meaningful in our day. We need to be prepared to change. Did the preacher say that this morning? We need to be prepared to change. But our change is always in the orbit of Christ, always in the way of the gospel, always in the way of reaching our community with good news. So let me thirdly say, some things have to change. Not everything is unchanging, even to our exploration, but some things must change. Isn't it a wonderful verse, that one in Revelation, when you get to the last book of the New Testament, where it talks in a very real way. Everything is changing. Something that's powerful. Behold, I am making all things new. And that's what God is doing all the time, making things new. And for many older people who are part of the gospel as we share it together here, many of you have seen so many changes. Thank God we are still here, and we shall still speak the name of the gospel. Of course, things are new. Things have to change. It was a very real thing that our expression of discipleship today. Discipleship is still at the heart of everything. That we not only follow Christ, but we follow the way of Christ as we discover it in the New Testament. Our vision and purpose of following Jesus. Questions we must ask ourselves about mission. It was John Steinbeck who penned these words. It is the nature of men and women as they grow older to protest against change, particularly change for the better. We need to sometimes be prepared to protest against wrong, not change. Not all change is wrong, but there are many things that are happening in our culture and in our community that are wrong. And we need to be prepared to speak about those things. The great challenge is to bring our understanding of change in line with the purposes of God. This is what it means to be a vibrant Christian community. In terms of Christian and mission and ministry, we have to face the fact that many people hanker after the past rather than the challenge of the future and the inevitability of change. It's not, I wish you could hold it back. I wish you could say, keep that bus back. There can't be any, but there will be, and it'll continue. But this is what you must say. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. All the change can happen, but he will not change. And his grace and his power is something that is there. A politician once said, she or he who rejects change is the architect of decay. The only human institution which rejects progress is the cemetery. We need to be those who are alive. Change is inevitable. Change is for the better, is a full-time task. None of us can avoid it. G.K. Chesterton is credited with the remark, when people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. And if you want to believe in the anything people have, Pick up a newspaper, watch the television and see the news, and you'll see there are many examples of the changes for anything that's going on in our society. This has to be understood against the background of the changes that have not only emerged but become established today. Just think of the world in which we're in. People are no longer likely to be consumers, more likely to be consumers, not producers. Our local neighbourhoods are disappearing at an alarming rate. I would even say to you, do you know who your neighbours are? Less and less of us really know who our neighbours are. We are more concerned about ourselves, not the neighbours, not those around us. We are more likely to recognise that. We are more mobile than ever, and places where people work. It's really only the last few years we've discovered people actually work at home nowadays. Things have changed so dramatically for the community in which we live. When I was heading the work of Wesley Mission in the city, it was so crowded to go in. And all the offices were there, and all the rooms were full. Let me tell you, one of the challenges for some of the businesses, they've got empty offices now because people are not working in cities anymore. They're working in different ways of doing things. The change is real. This is a 24/7 community. John Wesley's unique style of preaching is typified by his own characterization: plain truth for plain people. His reputation as an enthusiast led him to be described as one of the few characters who outlived enmity and prejudice. What a compliment for a preacher. In 1790, John Wesley visited the city of Chester. Chester's in the northwest of England, great cathedral. He addressed his fellow preachers, and this is what he said to the preachers who gathered, who were working with him. He said, "Fellow labourers, wherever there's an open door, enter in and preach the gospel. It may be 2 or 3 under a hedge or a tree. Preach the gospel. Go out quietly on the streets and lanes of the city. Bring in the poor, the maimed, the halt, and the blind. And after you've done all this, you will still have to say, like the servant of the gospel, 'Lord, it is done, as thou hast commanded, and yet still there is room.'" Sharing the good news was and remains one of Jesus Christ's chosen methods. Not just saying, we're going to build our little church up. We know that the needs in Australia, the needs in Sydney, the needs in this community are not only cross-cultural, there are so many that don't come, that are not there. And the only way they'll hear it is if you're prepared to speak it, if you're prepared to share it. It was Walter Brueggemann who said preaching ought to be an momentous event as giving an oracle of God. If you speak, you should do as one who speaks the very words of God, is what we read in 1 Peter. Let me tell you a story. The Reverend Dr. John Watson was a Presbyterian minister. And he was a minister for a number of years at Sefton Park Presbyterian Church in Liverpool. Not the Liverpool down the road, but the Liverpool back in England where the Beatles come from. And he was the minister there at the big Presbyterian church. And he was there. But he gained a bigger reputation for something else he did. He became a writer. And it would have been unthinkable to think that their pastor was writing books, maybe even selling them. And the truth was, he gave himself another name. It was a pen name. He gave himself the name that was to become to him, Ian McLaren. Ian McLaren, not the Reverend Dr. John Watson, even though that's who it was. He wrote under this pen name a collection of stories. And his first book was entitled Beside the Bonnie Briar Bush. He was from Scotland, where lots of the Presbyterians come from. He was from Scotland. And so it was that he wrote a story. And there was a Presbyterian tradition. And I'll tell you what it was. When somebody was trained in college, when they were ready to go to their first church, before they were allowed to go to their first church, they had to go back to their home church and preach first there. Still practice in some parts of the world. So he went back. It was called his great preaching. And what's even more, his mother said he wanted to hear the preaching first. So he went home to stay with his mother the night he went to the village in Scotland. And he preached the sermon to his mother. She shook her head. She really didn't know what to say. It was what he believed was a magnificent sermon. His old mother, fearing the natural vanity of this man, said to her son, "Laddie," as they say in Scotland, "Laddie, speak a good word for Jesus." She knew he was there to impress her, to impress all the congregation, all those who knew him. But she knew that the most important word he could speak was the name of Jesus Christ. The most important thing you do here in this church is to speak the name of Jesus in word and deed. Amen? Amen. Hallelujah.